Hey everyone, what's up? So there's a lot of people joining chess.com right now, and so many that once the USA wakes up, the servers are crashing, the database pipe is crashing quite frequently. But it's great news, lots of people getting into chess. So I know a lot of you will be joining chess.com and starting out practicing your skills by taking on the bots. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to do a little series in how to take out the free bots that you get without a paid subscription to chess.com. And here we're going to start with Martin, rated 250. I'm going to go random color, and we have the black pieces. Okay, so I'm going to assume you're a relative beginner at chess. You roughly know how the pieces move. And so what do we want to do? Well, we want to occupy the center. This is the center of the board. We want to control that center as quickly as we can in the game. So I'm going to bring a pawn out, putting one pawn in the center and controlling another square in the center at the same time. White also has a pawn in the center and is controlling one square, and this pawn also defends that one. Okay, so we want to control the center. What do? This is the center. We can bring knights out. Knights are a great way to do that. You can do that right at the start of the game. This knight can come here, or this knight, if he comes here, is then controlling these two squares in the middle of the board. Okay. Another thing that you can do is to move your other central pawn as well. That's perfectly good idea. But let's develop the king's knight. This does a few things. One is that if you want to castle your king, which is a very good idea and is important step for completing the opening phase of the game, which you should do as quickly as you can. Note that on the king's side, there are two pieces that have to get the heck out of the way. You have the king's knight and the king's bishop. Now the king's bishop is ready to come out into the board. On the queen's side, however, you have the queen's knight, the queen's bishop, and the queen herself. So three pieces have to vacate the queen's side before the king can castle to c8. But if he wants to go short and go to g8, then you only have to move two pieces. So let's move this bishop. Now this is not a good place to put it because it can't see the board. It's got a very restricted view. It can only see this diagonal, so that's not fantastic. This one likewise, it's got a pawn there, can't see much. This is a better square. This one's out because the pawn on b2 can take it. So we want to go here or here. Now, one good thing about this square is it's looking down at g1. Well, why is g1 an interesting place? Well, if your opponent castles kingside, g1 is going to be the square where the king ends up. So it's a nice idea to have a bishop looking down at that. So let's go ahead and do that. Another alternative is to put it on b4 here, which puts a pin on the knight. That means that the knight cannot move because it would be putting white in check, and you can't put yourself in check. It's illegal. But I'm going to put my bishop here. Martin's playing some very solid opening moves, by the way. The only slight issue with this d3 move is it blocks in this bishop. So right now, if he wants to castle kingside, he's going to have to put his bishop on e2, which is not a great place. Okay. Now, if he'd already got his bishop outside of this pawn chain, that's one thing. Now look at me. So I've moved my bishop already, and now I can play, for example, pawn to d6, where I'm moving it here. It's defending this, and it's defended by this. So it's what's called a pawn chain, right? And but my bishop's on the outside. Now we have tension between the bishops. Now, a lot of beginners would try and resolve the tension straight away by trading off, or they may come here, or they may come here. Now, bringing the bishop back to here, the b6 square, it's absolutely fine. Then if their bishop takes us, we can recapture with the h-pawn towards the center of the board, and that's pretty good. And that's probably, for a beginner, it's probably what I would recommend. So pull that back. If they take, we recapture, and it opens up options for our rook. So this is the opening phase of the game. What we're trying to do is we're trying to control as much of the board as possible, which gives us more options and actually reduces the options for the enemy. So let's castle the king. You want to do that pretty quickly. Okay. And they've moved their queen over here. So it's always a good idea to say, why did my opponent make that move? And quite honestly, I don't really know. Their bishop might come to here, but that's not a massive problem for us. So now let's just bring out our other knight. So we're getting close to completing development. Okay, they've now moved this knight a second time. So it's in our half of the board, and we should pay attention to it for sure. Now what's this knight actually doing? Is it threatening this pawn? Well, no, because bishop or rook could capture. Is it threatening this pawn? No, because bishop or queen could capture. Is it threatening this pawn? No, pawn and queen could capture. So that knight is no threat at all. Now you could kick the knight, could play, for example, pawn to a6, and say, shoo, knight, off you go, be on your way. But quite honestly, there's no actual immediate need to do so. So what I would suggest here is to say, okay, I recognize this, but I've evaluated that it is no real threat. What's more, white has actually wasted a bit of time moving that knight a second time. I mean, if we kicked it, for example, that knight would probably come back to this square, and then it's us to play. So white's actually wasted really 2 moves. Put a knight here, we maybe slightly improve our pawn, then the knight goes back. So white's position is the same as it was 2 moves ago, or moves like 7, but we've moved a pawn. The issue is, does moving that pawn help? Because our idea was, if their bishop takes our bishop, we can recapture with this pawn and open up that rook. If we've played this move, the knight retreats and then they take our bishop, we're going to have to recapture with this pawn. And that's not so great. So I'm going to ignore the knight. I'm going to forego the opportunity to kick the knight. I'm just going to bring my bishop out. I could bring it to here. That is an idea. But let's just bring it to this solid square here. Okay, and the knight's moved again. So you can see 1, 2, 3. Right? Now, white has had 9 moves, and 3 of them have been with all the queen's horses. Right, this guy. And the last 2 moves, so it was here, which is a good square. It was looking at the centre of the board. Right, but the last 2 moves, to come to here and now to there, it's made it worse. That knight is worse than it was when it was here. And white's wasted 2 moves. Right, so white still hasn't completed development. You know you completed development when the rooks can see each other. So let's complete development. Queen to d7. Now rook A is looking at these 2 rooks can see each other, and he's moved his knight again. Why? I could take out the knight if I wished. But now we've completed development because we haven't been messing around with our knight. If he takes here, I'm not too bothered. I'm happy with that. I can live with that. So, but we've completed development, which now means that we go out of the opening phase of the game into the middle game. Right? In the middle game, what your default is you want to improve your position. You want to see which pieces are not doing a good job and try and improve those pieces. So right now, this bishop's okay. It's looking down at where the king could end up, and it's in a safe place. Happy with that. Queen has got really no options right now, so something else is going to have to move. I've got all my pieces on the 3rd rank here, you see. So something might happen there. This knight is very important. You usually very often just leave that knight there. It's in a very important defensive position where it's covering the h7 square. If that knight wasn't there, then the only defender of h7 is your king, which makes it kind of vulnerable. This bishop is doing quite a good job. Now, eliminating this knight and then this pawn taking, that's not bad for us. But I think this bishop has options, it has opportunities. The piece I'm not so happy with is this knight here on c6. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to bring that knight round to this side of the board with the idea that opponent at some point may go in here. Okay, castle, which means we've got a target. Right now, the king could go either way, theoretically. So we don't really know where we're attacking yet. All right. So the knight has come in again. So instead of completing development, getting the queen off the back rank and castling, white has decided to move an already developed piece a second time. Now, it's looking at this pawn. Is that a problem? Well, king takes. Or even knight takes. So I think we're happy with that. It's also looking at this bishop. Now, so what you have to do is say, okay, I see this. I'm relaxing. It's fine. Right? We don't have to panic. It's called an attack. Right? Sometimes attacks don't work. Sometimes attacks blow up in the face of the attacker. Sometimes they are good. Now, so what you do is you say, okay, well, let's say I allow the horse to take my bishop. What happens? I recapture. And I've got two ways to recapture. I can recapture with my queen, or I can recapture with this pawn here. Now, recapturing with this pawn here gives me 3 pawns in the 2 central files, the D and E files, whereas opponent only has 2 pawns in the central files. And that's actually slightly better for us. Also, we open up this file, which means we don't have a rook of our own a pawn of our own color on this file, which means our rook is then suddenly potentially able to move right up and down the board. So I'm going to ignore this threat. I mean, I could again capture that knight, but I'm not too concerned. So what I'm going to do is another just general principle move. I'm going to move a rook to the central 2 files. Reason being that very often these files will open up because players often have their more advanced pawns in the center, and these pawns are likely to trade off at some point in time. Okay, so what's going on here? Yeah, I could kick the knight, but there's no real need to do that. I could do the same thing. I could come in here and attack this, for example. I could bring my bishop in here. If they take me, I recapture with the queen. And then my queen's very much in line with that king as well. And in fact, if I put my bishop here, this bishop's got nowhere to go. If it goes backwards, I can take it out if I wish. So what should be our plan here? Our opponent's looking at this. Well, I'm not too worried about that. Do you know what I'm going to do? Let's eliminate the bishop. I'm going to take out this knight and mess up white's pawns a bit. So what's happened now is the D pawn has now moved away from the center. This is the center of the board, right? Moved away from the center. Still controls 1 square in the center, but we are now looking a bit better. Also notice what's happened is because that pawn's moved there, it's no longer defending this square. So what is defending this square? Well, only this knight. So, what if we kick the knight away? White defends the knight, and this is really the first big mistake that Martin has made, which is he's been playing very well for 250 rated bot. Okay, I attack the knight, white defends. The problem is I'm attacking with a pawn, nominal value 1. They're defending, but the knight has a nominal value of 3. So I take the knight, they recapture with bishop or pawn. I've won a knight that's worth 3, and it's only cost me a pawn that's worth 2. What's more, where's the knight gone? And what was that knight doing? We just talked about it. Look. Now I've got my pawn back. All right. So we are now up in material. Now, one thing that I do all the time, constantly when I'm playing, I'm scanning for undefended pieces, right? So I can tell you that everything on white side of the board is actually defended, and the bishop and the queen defend each other. Apart from that bishop, actually. Technically, that bishop is not defended by any other piece, right? Other than that, everything else is defended. My knight here is also not defended. So I need to be kind of careful about that. However, it can come back here. That's not a bad square for it. Also notice we have what's called tension between the bishops. The bishops are looking at each other. They could choose to take each other out, right? They've got the guns pointed at each other. So what I'm just going to drop my knight back to this square. Now the bishop could take it, but then my bishop can ooh! Okay, so if the bishop takes now, my bishop takes, and why has he pushed that pawn? Because that would actually put him in check as well. Bishop defends his pawn, so does the queen behind the bishop. Okay, now I think it's time just to keep improving. Also, you've got to think about knights, they're slow and they're cumbersome, right? But once they get in close contact, they're very powerful because they can look at up to 8 squares in all directions, and they are very, very, very tricky customers. All right, so And knights become more powerful the closer to the enemy king that they get. They get more powerful the further up the board they get. So a knight on the 5th, 6th or 7th rank can be super, super dangerous. Alright, so what are we doing? What are we doing? I'd love to eradicate this pawn, but it is guarded twice right now. Let's just keep on improving. Just keep improving. Now another general principle as well is, because we are up material, we're actually up a full piece. Okay, so we've got 3 minor pieces. White has 2 minor pieces. Now it is the bishop pair, which is not a bad thing. So the queen has now moved. So after every turn, say to yourself, right, what's changed on the board? Well, remember how we said that this pawn is defended twice? Now it ain't. Now it's defended once. So how about sticking our queen here with the idea of putting 2 attackers and only 1 defender? Okay, Martin pushes pawn to b3. This is okay. Now the first thing I'd want to check is my bishop about to be trapped? They push the pawn, no. My bishop is happy. I've got time to move a pawn, whatever. Oh, hang on. How long has that been there? Okay, remember since I moved my knight, I missed something. Remember we said, in fact, it was this bishop that was undefended, but the other thing that's changed with this move is the queen is not only no longer defending this pawn, but is no longer defending this bishop either. So I missed it. They've done that. But now I can take this bishop for free, plus it comes with something else, a pin on the rook. So, I mean, apart from the fact that this rook can't actually move anyway, even if it could, it couldn't, because it would put the white king in check, and you're not allowed to do that. So now I can grab me a rook as well. Happy days. And now let's grab the pawn. Let's grab it with the queen. And we are now in a very strong position. Okay. So now I'm very conscious that this whole file is open. So what I'm going to do now is get my king out the way and tuck it there on f7. Okay, he's just played a nothing move. Then I'm going to get a rook onto the open h file. And so if I can play my queen to any of these squares and then dive into h1, the king must move to f2. It's the only legal move. Then I can swap off queens if I like. I would love to cover that square, but I can't really because of all these light squared pieces. So you see, with a knight, I'd want to put a knight here or here to cut off the king's escape square, and I can't because of this diamond pattern. That's something you'll get used to later on in endgames. I could give check here actually, which would also force the queen to block because the king now can't move onto the h-file. So that's also an idea. I could move my queen here and attack this pawn that's undefended, as is this one. I could, but let's play kind of simple and principled. What I'm going to do now, I'm just going to double up my rooks, put them both on the h-file. Okay, this changes nothing, because now we can checkmate white. That was just a blunder. Right, the queen should have moved farther away. In fact, she couldn't even go there. But this is going to be checkmate now. The king is in check and has nowhere to go. So there you go. That, boys and girls, is how to beat the Martin bot on chess.com. So Martin actually played a lot stronger than 250 for much of the game there, but then kind of fell to pieces in the middle game. So yeah, so if you're a beginner and you want to take on these bots, then just try and emulate that kind of thought process. Incorporate some of my tips into your thinking. More than anything else, slow down, take your time, notice everything that changes on the board with every move. Try and say to yourself, what was my opponent trying to do there? Okay, and just consider what their plans are, not only your own, and I'm sure you'll be able to beat Martin pretty easily. Right, thanks for watching everyone, see you soon.